welcome to today's webcast where we're going to talk about sustainability leadership. My name is Demet Tunç. I lead the Customer Experience Council at the Conference Board. I also work as a management consultant in executive search and in leadership advisory. Today with our guest Nina Glass, we will talk about sustainability leadership and its impact, especially in these difficult times of pandemic. Before I introduce you to the content of this webcast, let me give you a couple of tips about joining this webcast. You can ask questions during the webcast in the box that appears at the bottom left of your screen. Actually, the more you join, the more you are engaged in this presentation, the better it is. So we would encourage you to participate in the discussions that I will have in a minute with Nina. You can share this presentation, this webcast with your colleagues within your network, and the webcast will be available on demand. And you can also view the presentation in full screen mode if you would like to. By joining this webcast, you will be able to earn credits. And to be able to do so, you need to click on the links that will appear throughout the webcast 3 times. I think that was all about the tips. Let me first introduce you to Nina Glass. So Nina has started her career in strategy and in commercial roles in companies such as Burger King and MasterCard, first in the US. Then she moved from New York to London. I think that was quite some time ago, while she was working for the American Express. And then she decided to become a management consultant in executive search. And after that, she has worked with some companies, and currently she's with Eric Salmon and Partners. And I know that she's very passionate about supporting her clients in topics that relate to organizational design, succession planning, team effectiveness, business change, and also transformation. And when I say she's passionate, actually the topic that she's the most passionate about is sustainability. And she's a person that continuously develops and improves her knowledge. And due to that, she has just completed, not just, but she has recently completed the Cambridge University's Business Sustainability Management Program, so that she can support her clients even better. Welcome, Nina. It's a pleasure to have you with us.
It's a pleasure to be here, Demet.
Well, Nina, the coronavirus pandemic has had a serious effect on the lives of people, not only on the lives of the people actually, but also on the role the leaders can play a role to shape up the future. And sustainability has been in the agenda of many companies from big to small, because everybody is keen on building a brighter future. And in your opinion, in today's situation, while we're going through a pandemic, what do you think that the impact of COVID is on the sustainability leadership?
Well, it is a pleasure to be here, and I think probably a good place to start in answering that question is in a way to define what sustainability is. And I'll just start with that, and to say that sustainability in a nutshell is the ability to exist, and in a consistent way and a constant way. And that is, just as it sounds like says on the tin, it is sustainability. To me, what the pandemic has done is really throw into sharp relief the interconnectedness that we have. And it is a pandemic, it is worldwide, and that the ability to exist in a way constantly means the ability to coexist and work together in terms of making that happen. Now, what I think is, for some people, there was already this notion. I think that people had realized, a certain group, that this was a consequential point in our history. For others, COVID has been a bit of a wake-up call. And there's this realization that what we do now will impact the generations to come. But beyond a shadow of a doubt, what I'm very clear on is whatever camp you were in, that COVID has been an accelerator. And I think that to me is really paramount to the discussion that we're going to have. I suppose, to me, the pre-pandemic sort of storylines around sustainability. Dimensions were very much in terms of the story around issues we see in the top left corner of that page, the Australian wildfires. We see the issues associated with Rana, the Plaza, terrible, terrible accident that ensued in Bangladesh in 2013, killing 1,000 people. So societal issue, very serious structural issue there that could have been solved were it something that was taken care of in advance of this tragedy. And we see the photo in the bottom left corner, city right next to wildlife. So this kind of diversity, biodiversity coming up right against the populations of the city, and we are a growing population worldwide. So really very stressful and de-stressing stories. We have David Attenborough and Greta, who everybody recognizes at this point, given David Attenborough's worldwide coverage on the older side of the spectrum, and Greta on the younger side of the spectrum, but two very influential speakers and influential people that were taking forward this notion of sustainability and the need to do things differently. But I would argue that the storylines that we saw were very much about the tragedy, the horror, the negative. And to me, what I've seen as painful, I have to say, as I think we've experienced and we have more to experience about the pandemic, to me, there are some silver linings, and they are to do very much instrumentally with sustainability and where it goes. For me,
So actually, I'm sorry for interrupting, but actually the leaders need to understand all these issues to also detect the commercial implications of all these events happening in the world, right? Because all the social and environmental events that are happening throughout the world at the end of the day has a business impact, and most of the time they have a negative business impact, which can be avoided if the precautions are taken in advance.
Well,
right?
I would argue that the lens that people have looked through, and I think what you're describing is how do we mitigate risk? How do we deal with the negative consequence? And I think what I am putting forward to you is it's not only about the negative, it is about the positive too. And so when I flip back to the page before, what it really encapsulated was what I think that we were hearing a lot of in the press was that negative. And what I'm turning over now the leaf forward in terms of this slide is what I'm saying is some of the silver lining that I'm seeing coming out. And I think that, if you look at two pots there, two camps, you'll see government officials on the left and businesses on the right. Governments through the crisis, the EU, for example, putting forward a 750 COVID recovery program with green conditions, or in Canada, if there was support that was given, it was very clear from the government, there was a mandate that it was going to be required to disclose elements that were around environmental sustainability, climate impacts, these kinds of things. In London, we have a 1.5 billion infrastructure package that has a green element to it. This is where I live, so I'm sharing that with you. And in the UK, more broadly, there was relief that was given over and above that at the £3 billion mark. I think we have a hern there because there is that human side in terms of leadership that we've seen coming from New Zealand. And I could go on about the government side, I think it's interesting for the discussion here because we have a lot of business leaders, the business side of things, and companies that really came to the fore in all different kinds of ways. And many of you will have heard this, I'm sure. Elements like H&M actually going to suppliers and having PPE made, so that the protective gear was made from their suppliers that were usually manufacturing their garments, or Sony with a donation of $100 million to COVID relief, or Marks and Spencer, who had their suppliers that usually made pajamas make National Health Service gowns. All of these kinds of things that were really all about getting society back on its feet. It's the first time that there has been this radical kind of activity. And beyond the crisis in these camps, we have this opportunity. And that's what I'm saying is the upside and the chance to do things slightly differently. So we have Antonio Guterres, the UN Secretary General, saying we have this rare and short window to build back better, stronger, more resilient world. And then Paul Pullman, who in sustainability circles is one of the, from a business perspective, one of the kind of grandfathers, as it were, in terms of delivering sustainability, Unilever being one of the companies that's remarked upon because of the way that it's not only taken sustainability forward, but also embedded it. And I'll come to that later. But what he says, and it's a very simple quote, but it is very potent: you can't have a sustainable business without a sustainable planet.
Correct. And actually, the examples that you're giving are making me think about the behavior change in purchase decision making for the consumers. We are all consumers, and everybody has is now trying to protect the future, and they're trying to decrease the CO2 emissions. They are trying to go and select greener products. They're even at schools. I mean, you cannot take a plastic water bottle because the teacher would shame on you if you bring that to school. So actually there's also the social pressure which impacts the consumer behavior tremendously in a good way, which urges the leader to think and act differently as it comes to sustainability.
I couldn't agree more, and it's one of the, again, one of the points that you're raising, which is about the upside too. There is an opportunity to position a company in a way that's actually going to generate further sales. An example of that is Patagonia, right? They've done an exquisite job. In fact, one of the debates that one could have as to whether they're actually selling more than maybe they should, because actually too much product out there, is that really sustainable? But that's one of the things I have tongue in cheek in a way say, because I think that they, again, like a Unilever, are very much a leader in sustainability, and we can again talk about them. There's a little bit more coming around that with the consumer, because I think it's a really important point. And one that actually absolutely should go into the mixer. But the one last thing on this page that I have here is, of course, the pandemic, the Spanish influenza, the pandemic of the early 1900s, right? So we all know about that now, having been through the pandemic that we're going through now. Lots of storylines about, the previous worldwide challenges. You know what? We got through that, and we will get through this one. And I think we had the Roaring Twenties. Maybe we'll get something that's really good in the Roaring Twenties this time around too.
Yeah. One of the people attending the webcast is saying that Patagonia also recycles circular with wornwear.
Yes, absolutely. Program. And I think if for any of us that have partaken in it, we know it's a big thumbs up. So whomever is in the audience saying that, I am absolutely with you. I thought it was useful to
Right.
perhaps counter into sustainable leadership. And this is, I think, important to just kind of give the little bit of an explanation more specifically on what it entails. And you'll see on the right side that there's an image, and that image is one that's from Cambridge Institute for Sustainability Leadership. Now, Demet had mentioned that I've studied with Cambridge. I'm also active in their accelerator mentor program. I happen to think that they have some very good groundings for people to get their head around, and this is one of them. And why I like it is it's a chart that demonstrates, and the comment beneath, sustainability leadership around aligning business success with delivery of positive social and environmental outcomes. It doesn't mean that there are positive social and environmental outcomes without the business success. It's not divorcing the two. Sometimes I think people have in their mind's eye that this is going to be a cost, it's negative, it's bad, it's hard. Admittedly, it's not easy. That is true. But actually, it is this marriage of the business success with these other elements. You know, there's the expression in medicine, first do no harm. In a way, it's thinking about that for the business environment and saying, we're gonna make sure whatever we do, that commercial success is not going to trump social and environmental outcomes. We're going to, at a minimum, have no impact, and at a maximum, actually have positive impact. And that's ultimately what we're talking about here.
I would like to remind the audience that you can ask your questions by writing in the chat box that appears at the bottom left or your right of the screen. Okay, Nina.
Well,
you
you laid the groundwork very nicely in terms of some of what I'd like to take us to, in view of your point around the consumer. There are catalysts for corporate change. One of them being this VUCA world that we live in. So those of you that are familiar with the acronym, volatility, uncertainty, complexity, and ambiguity. And the reality being that with corporate change moving at this rate and with so much actually at stake and this dynamism, to have a resilience about your business model is really very, very important. And that, again, to use the Paul Pullman expression, is about what sustainability has at its center. It's very much around how you build a business to last over the long term. And that means actually doing it in a way that is robust for the future. The elements that Demet had mentioned are coming, but before that, linked to something earlier on that she commented on, is this point around some of the compliance and government aspects around risk. And more we are seeing activity take shape in that respect, and there's only more of that that's going to come. So there's an argument to say, if you get ahead of the wave, actually, do you do yourself benefit by doing that? And not only in terms of creating the efficiencies before they come and therefore potentially getting more return from that, more benefit from it, but actually, is it something that ends up being an opportunity to put yourself before your competitors, arguably actually the first mover advantage? So as examples of some of those things, we're seeing plastics regulation come into effect. We have countries banning fossil fuel cars. Norway here in Europe is amongst the first. They have a ban starting in 2025. Germany is shortly thereafter, 2030. Here in the UK, it's 2040, but there is an idea that that might come forward into 2035. Obviously, as an example, that's impacting not only the fossil fuel companies, but the automotive companies. And we are seeing, to use a pun, the drive forward from those automotive companies to get into the electrical vehicle market, the EV market, sooner rather than later. There's also points around mandatory reporting that are coming to effect. here in the UK, but it's starting to roll out not only here in the UK, it's where I live, but elsewhere in the world, are for banks to report disclosure around climate and risk and so on. So there are a number of things in this respect. And then
there's a cost that is associated to it. There's a cost for the companies because it requires investment in technology, in innovation. It probably means changing their manufacturing lines, hiring new talent that can understand the future impact of their products, but also there's a cost for the consumers. If we're talking about the automotive sector, when you want to buy a Tesla, it is one of the most expensive brands in the automotive market. So you have to bear with that cost if you want to save the future.
That's true now in a way, and I'm not a specialist. There might be somebody in the audience. I know there's a lot more about the automotive space than do I, but I have understood from being in the circles that I'm in that the price on an EV is coming down considerably, and certainly within the next several years, it should be that we should be able to find EV without those issues. There are other issues that are associated with it that have caused concern in terms of adoption, things like charging, the range, payload, all of these kinds of things, and infrastructure around countries hasn't gotten yet up to the point where people feel at ease. And it's an important point because around the consumer aspect around sustainability and sustainable products, I would always say, I think that, and were you to ask the question, let me take the step back and say, are people willing to pay for sustainability? You know, that's really very much at the heart of some of the adoption with sustainability. And we see that there is a need for a product to be as good as something, or nearly as good as something that's already out there that isn't sustainable, in order for somebody to take the leap and buy it. In other words, by and large, the consumer is not going to pay twice the cost of something that's already out there that isn't sustainable. So there is this need to constantly innovate and use technologies. And what I would say is there is a great deal of exponential development in technology that's allowing for the acceleration of costs to come down. Number one. Number two, there is activity around what's kind of called frugal innovation. So doing innovation and launching products that might be lower price as a result of being a little bit more creative, or launching to certain target markets that might not need the best of class. For example, Siemens launched some medical equipment in some markets worldwide that weren't quite at the level as what was needed in some of the Western markets that we are interested in covering all of the litigious aspects around our hospitals, our institutions, and so on, but actually was 95% of the way there and good enough. So there are all sorts of elements around innovation. Your point being, absolutely, it's important to make sure that the price and benefit are reasonable in the decision set that the consumer has. But coming back to the consumer, I think, in terms of the some overarching points that are useful to talk about in terms of catalysts for corporate change. We have a number of research pointers that I've seen and clients of mine have seen. Edelman, the barometer, for example, maybe some people in the audience are familiar with. That survey is done recently. 76% of those interviewed say that they believe that the CEO should take the lead in making change happen. And that rather than waiting for governments to impose things, that should be something that happens instinctively by CEOs. And that's up 11% year over year. So we're seeing changes that are really considerable last year to this year, the year before that to last year, and so on. 88% want brands to help them live sustainably. And when we get into, and why that picture has Gen Zs in it, and younger millennials, people slightly younger than me, only just, we have even that much more of the intent of these kinds of consumers on having that happen. 92% of the younger workforce, meaning this Gen Z, care about issues and are brought up in this environment of recycling being front and center, social and environmental kind of impact being front and center, diversity, equity, and inclusion being front and center, all of these points around sustainability.
Okay, all right. Well, actually, you were mentioning that it's the CEO who needs to walk the talk and bring the sustainability in the agenda. It starts with the CEO, then it has to be embedded in the organization through the executive committee, through the leadership committee, management committee, whatever you call it. So I have a question for the audience when you brought the topic up, and you can just answer by saying yes, no. But is sustainability a hot topic for your company, which is led by the executive board? If you can answer that question by yes or no, is sustainability a hot topic for your company, which is led by the executive committee in your company? And then you can continue your talk, Nina. When answers come, I will let you know how many yes.
Well, that will be interesting to hear. And I look forward to not only hearing about that, but I'm curious about some other elements around owning sustainability through a company. We can compare and contrast some notes. So another point here is around the financial markets and catalysts for corporate change. And I think here what I really wanted to impart is, and again, coming back to one of the earlier points, Demet, that you raised, there actually is great benefit in being ethical or having these ESG components, environmental, social, and governance aspects. Morningstar recently came out and they had said that 51 of their 57 funds actually performed better that had these components to them. And they also did a study looking at the last 10 years at ethical funds. I think that there were something like 750 funds that they looked at, and over the 10 years, there was better performance within those funds against traditional kinds of funds, which is interesting. More interesting, I think, even than that, is that was true in terms of performance also over the COVID period, the pandemic period. So again, what we're hearing is that businesses that do this and do it in a way throughout their organizations actually are more robust for the VUCA environment, the volatile, uncertain, complex, and ambiguous kind of environment that we live in. So I think that's useful. Were you going to say something? You were going to report back on what the audience said?
Yeah. Well, the audience says that sustainability is in the agenda of their company, and but somebody from the audience says that actually it's coming from bottom up, from the grassroots, not top down, which might be true in some cases.
I think actually it's true more often than you might think. We can come to that a little bit as we canter through things, but I actually think that even where there is the top-down kind of approach, even where there is that support, very often what I hear from clients in terms of the embedding is that there is this bottom up. There at the grassroots level, there is the true believers. Some, not all, is related to this point around the consumer side of things, but also the employee side of things, which the age. So at the perhaps the grassroots level of an organization, we might see more youthful people. Again, talking about the younger millennials, the Gen Zs that have grown up with this, where this is front and center, and where they're really feeling this is affecting not might not affect my grandparents or my parents so much as it's going to affect me and my kids, so that much more of the connection to it. So I think the point that your audience, our audience member is making absolutely is true. The point I think we'll come to, and I'll talk about a little bit, is actually levering that, really making the most out of the grassroots level is absolutely part and parcel with how you embed sustainability. Because there's some great examples where there's great ideas, and imbuing those ideas throughout an organization actually can be very, very powerful indeed. Having the buy-in at the top matters too, but actually having the ownership at the top without people engaged, you also wouldn't have very much success in terms of embedding sustainability or any other kind of theme for that matter.
Well, there's a lot of comments from the audience. There's this top-down, bottom-up approach, and actually somebody says that message is coming top-down, however the solutions are coming bottom-up. It is a joint engagement that is needed as both are going through the learning curve.
I think it's a great comment too.
Okay.
I thought it was useful to just give one example of the financial market side of things. Many may know BlackRock, one of the largest, I think it is the largest asset manager in the world, $7.4 trillion of assets under management. And Larry Fink, within sustainability circles, historically had been somebody that was, let me say, not so well thought of. There was a view that it was all about, in terms of purpose, making money without all of the elements as he saw them that were a cost to the system. What we've seen is a real pivot, volte-face. And what he has come out and said, and the quote is there, climate change has become a defining factor in companies' long-term prospects. And so what we've seen is a real change in mindset. And one could say his purpose has changed. We hear the word purpose floated around a lot. Whether you want to call it purpose or a different way of thinking, I think might be the easier way to describe it. There is something that was a bit of a seminal moment for him. Seminal moment. It's a point where he's realized that things actually can and should be done differently. And we've seen lots of initiative and action come out of BlackRock. So I would say, in fact, though historically they were perhaps a little bit of the companies that were on the badly thought of list for a period of time, it's gone absolutely in the counter direction in terms of their impact in making change in a positive way. Because Fink and the colleagues there are highly influential in the financial markets. I thought it might be useful just to say, and maybe this comes back to something that you said, Demet, the walking the talk, not just talking the talk. The authentic action is very important. And where I've said there increasing pressure to demonstrate authentic action, that is because there is a view that there has been a great deal of what's called greenwashing, and many of you in the audience will know what that is, but it's where there is a positioning around the comments that are put forward by a company, which actually may or may not be meaningful in terms of making real change, real shift happen. And I think that what is kind of useful to share, Schroders just recently did a survey, and there is marked results in terms of the percentages that we've seen with people that are within the financial market saying the biggest concern that they have is around companies greenwashing, and that there is a need to have better reporting instruments that are consistent and global in order to make sure that like-for-like comparisons are there and that people are upholding to certain standards. So the pressure is going to be there because these reporting standards already are and will continue only to get more and more rolled out and a view that they need to be adhered to. The other point is around, and this is the Guardian, a broadsheet, a big one of the big newspapers here in the UK. Businesses making eco-friendly claims are to be vetted by the watchdog, which is the Competition and Markets Authority here. In America, I guess it would be like the Federal Commission for Trading. I think that's what it's called. I am American, but it's been a while since I lived there, and I forget certain things, so I hope the audience forgives me that. But the Competition Markets Authority here in the UK will be looking, because there is such a wide berth that companies can have in terms of saying we're sustainable. It's actually started to become a little bit of greenwashing. It's become a little bit of a, there's a lack of clarity, and we can't really decipher what's real and what isn't real. So now there's going to be this kind of vetting process. In sustainability circles, a client of mine said, you know, we actually can put forward certain things where nobody is really at this point checking properly the degree to which what we're saying about our garment is real, but that will come. And now we're, as I say, starting to see that roll out. So these are all other points in terms of the pressures, but this point around authenticity is really very, very paramount. And it's a nice segue into, I think, this transition into sustainability comment that I'd like to make, because authenticity means actually not saying that you have done everything and achieved everything overnight. It's a non-starter. And I put on this slide, it's like a little bit of a metaphor for what's happening with sustainability. It's the transition to digital. We are where we are now. I can go back 20 years when digital, I remember being in an American Express actually when things were starting to get digitized, and it was this, you know, really scratching of heads. What's that? Well, I think we're beyond the scratching head points in sustainability in some pockets, but not across the board. And there is going to be the need not to go cold turkey in the same way there wasn't with digital and analog, but rather allow it to be a process. I think we are seeing the embedding does take a while to happen. There's a company that's very well established with sustainability that I would say recognized leader client, and they would say, in a nutshell, nobody in the company any longer asks why. Everybody knows why. But the question of the how is still a challenge. And I think it's a nice way of describing it, because it harkens back to some of the elements around digital.
Well, Nina, it's interesting what you're saying, and we have a lot of participation from the audience. Unfortunately, I can't read all the comments. It's a lot coming, but somebody's saying that, which I know that I think you will talk about it, prioritizing purpose-driven impact will also have an impact on ESG, how companies work. And I know that you are going to talk about purpose, right? Because everybody says we're a purpose-driven company, but how is that actually lived and executed is an important aspect. What do you
Well, I
think
mean,
about that?
I think my view on the comment around purpose is I think that there is a lot that's thrown around about purpose, purpose, purpose. I think there have always been corporate leaders have always had purpose in some way. Purpose has always been there amongst, I think about when I went to business school. I remember Jack Welch coming to speak, CEO of GE at the time. He was a man with absolute purpose. His purpose was this operational excellence and to make money. So he had purpose. I think it's about repurposing in a way. It's about having a different view around how you approach business. So whether we want to call it purpose or something else, it's a different kind of mindset. It's a different sort of approach. I think it is a good comment in terms of the linking to this slide that I'm putting forward now. What's different about the sustainability-led leader, and I've put forward some of what's in the model that we use at Eric Salmon and Partners, my company that I'm a part of, think competencies, act competencies, and connect competencies that are somewhat different around the sustainability-led leader. And with the thinking competencies, we're talking about, rather than strategic thinking in its purest form, this is really around systemic thinking. So strategic absolutely is around thinking complexity, but systems thinking is about those interlocking pieces. And it's like, as somebody put it to me, it's strategic thinking to the next level. It's like the next, it's raised to the power of. It's a more full stakeholder management, and that's a fundamental difference. And I think it's useful to talk about the Milton Friedman days of businesses in business for business, or that kind of mantra, where the shareholder was the shareholder primacy and all of that kind of thinking is really the different within the approach of the sustainability-led leader. Coming back to the audience members' point around purpose, it's around taking into account the management of a company, the employees of a company, all of the other aspects of stakeholder management, including the government, the community, suppliers, customers, NGOs, you name it, all of those kinds of stakeholders. So that's a lot more complex to manage as a sustainability-led leader when you're thinking outside of that traditional prism or paradigm, and to manage all of that kind of nuance. And connecting the inclusive and federating and storytelling elements that are really center to making this happen. Characteristics, I just wanted to cover very quickly, characteristics around rapport building and care and compassion, but never for a moment think that it's care and compassion and it means kind of hugging trees and going out and saying peace, love, and understanding. There's very much still, and going back to the slide earlier, the commerciality in terms of driving for results, ambition and courage with those. And I would say the learning kind of approach. So what you see in sustainability-led companies is this constant learning and unlearning and learning again, the piloting piece, the knowing, something might fail, but I'm going to give it a go. And if it doesn't work, I'll try something else. And that's allowed, and it goes from the leader downward. And this notion that I don't have all the answers, the vulnerability, the emotional connection with that, but the humility with it in terms of sustainability-led leaders. And with it linked to it, and this goes back to the federating point, you cannot solve these challenges that are systemic, that are so widespread as a sole company. So I look at, earlier today I was looking at something that L'Oreal has underway, which is for a plastics bottle. They're working with Total and a company called LanzaTech. There's a collaboration going on. No one company can develop that on its own without it being best in class, actually working. And so there's much more of this emphasis on vulnerability, humility, but also this kind of collaboration and federating spirit. And I think, to the audience members' point again, this relentless commitment to values. The compass, the true north, some people use, but it's really around that multi-stakeholder kind of mindset.
Okay. Nina, I lead the Customer Experience Council, and it's a peer networking group of senior leaders who are responsible for customer experience. And in our meetings, we talk about customer centricity, customer experience, customer journeys. And actually, we say that the customer is sitting in the middle of the organization. It's the core, and the customer is not owned by the sales team. It's not owned by the marketing team. It's actually, this customer centricity is owned by all the employers. And that's why there's a very direct correlation between employee experience and customer experience. So when I see your slide, which doesn't say sustainability leader, it says sustainability-led leader, I link it a bit to our conversations, because actually sustainability is also a topic that needs to be owned by all the employees in the company. So my question to you is, in an organization, or in general terms, is there like one owner of sustainability, or is this a topic that has to be embedded in the business agenda, in the way people work and act? So how does the organization look?
Well, I would say to you, it's both. And that might be a bit of a cop-out to you in terms of an answer, but I do think it's both. I do have some slides upcoming which talk to the organizational structure. So I think if I can answer that in just a moment, but I will give a couple of case kind of stories in the making that might bring to life some of what you're asking. And I think a good place to start might be with Danone, FMCG leader worldwide. Emmanuel Faber, who is the CEO, has actually ascribed and has a relentless pursuit on this food is a human right kind of one planet, one health motto. And it was he, the leadership team, but he that was instrumental in ensuring that the company did flip to its status of becoming an entreprise à mission. Pardon me for those of you that might be French by background. Apologies for my accent. But this is a society that in the Articles of Association, they have ascribed bringing health through food to as many people as possible. And this is really their cornerstone. The embedding of that is not an easy process in terms of ensuring that all parts of the company are aligned behind the objectives, but they do have at every level within the organization plans and rewards and structure that are tied up to the overarching goal at hand. And I think, there are others that equally are examples where one of our clients who for many years has had 21 different metrics associated with sustainability. And every person within their organization, and they have thousands of employees, actually has something on their year end that is assessing their contribution to the overall sustainability goals. There are many other examples here that I could talk to, and we might want to come back to it, but I'm conscious of the time, and I want to hit your point, which is around, where does it come from? And this is just a very simple slide, but it's designed to show exactly what you and the other person in the audience mentioned, where you do have these coming together from top down and the bottom up. And the board and the CEO actually do need to ask the question, what do we want to achieve? And, how realistic is it? And making sure that they're not just talking the talk around it, but they're walking the walk, walking the talk, and the governance around that. But as the audience member pointed out, a lot of the time, these are in terms of the germination of ideas, it comes from the grassroots level. And there's a wonderful kind of example I can give where an FMCG company that is a client actually has had a series of storytelling that they put forward on a monthly basis. Somebody has come up with an idea that isn't just a concept, but actually has been trialed and is getting rolled out within the company. And I think that this kind of pledging to make that happen, and going back again to characteristics of the sustainable leader, there's this openness and inclusion to trialing and making things happen. But recognition that in order to start things rocking and rolling, you do, along with having that, in an ideal scenario, ownership at the top, have what people describe as the coalition of the willing. P&G, that's been at sustainability for a long time, Virginie Helaz, who's a sustainability head there, talks about the fact that when she launched, this was absolutely how she went about things, because there might have been the endorsement at the top, but the coalition of the willing was very, very important. And it was people that were, very often they weren't allocated to the project of sustainability, but they were throwing their hat in the ring to get involved. And then you have this diffusion of innovators. I use the word in the most generic way, in a way, which is to say innovation, because so much of sustainability is linked to innovation, but innovation in terms of moving the business on from the traditional. That's what it's meant to be. This is not easy. I say it again, I said it previously, it is not easy. There's tension. And so I talked about the resilience for the business model, and the benefit of resilience of the business model. It's also really important for whomever is involved with sustainability, be it a CSO, Chief Sustainability Officer, or whatever the sustainable leader title is, that person has the characteristics of not only tenacity, which is that doggedness, but also resilience, which is, okay, that didn't go so well. I'll take it on the chin. I'll shrug my shoulders, and you know what? I'll learn from that adversity and get on with things, and have that optimism. That's really a cornerstone for resilience, gratitude and optimism. But also this overarching kind of theme that I see in the sustainability leaders that I meet that are successful. They have that resilient quality. You asked.
Okay. There are some questions from the audience, so I'm just waiting for you to finish, and then I will allocate like a couple of minutes for the questions,
okay.
Because we have
I just will very quickly counter through being the agent of change. There are some elements here around what one can think about in appointing a chief sustainability officer or a sustainability lead, somebody that knows the business well and has a good track record, either within a business or if they're outside coming in, making great decisions. Because sustainable leaders that are really good at what they do are able to talk to their peers in a way that is business savvy, business sensible. So to use your point around the customer team, marketing teams, etc., actually having the discussion around the effect on customers as an example, as a peer, or operations, which sometimes is a very resistant area in terms of some of the embedding for sustainability, or finance for that matter, actually having the skills to be able to talk about financial aspects and metrics, and to be able to talk about some of the nuts and bolts around operation. Doesn't mean that you need to be the expert that those functional leads are, but to be able to be seen holistically as a business person, and to bite-sized chunks of some of the elements around here. But I think the on the right-hand side, it summarizes by saying, inform as a leader, giving the story as to the why, the positive, generating interest, the hook, and then the engaging, which is the wins that have been demonstrated, and again, repeating with the storyline. And you'd asked about organizing, and I just wanted to talk about this very briefly. There are many ways to skin the cat here. I have a number of clients that are looking at putting a chief sustainability officer in place, where maybe historically they have had a sustainability leader lower down in an organization. Maybe it has been a part of an operations team. Maybe it has been a part of a corporate affairs or governance team. There are still individuals that I would say are very visible and very well connected that might report into those functions, and there's nothing wrong with it. Sometimes it might report directly into a CEO, but the reality is that it can report in any area that you might see. Strategy and innovation, increasingly I'm seeing it linked with, given that if you have sustainability viewed as something that's integral to the business model and business case, then linking it with strategy makes sense. But a lot of it is related to governance, and so corporate affairs quite often will have it, and so on. There's also a link, very importantly, to the chief people officer, and it's around diversity, equity, and inclusion. It is also around some of the societal aspects with sustainability in terms of human rights worldwide, and supply chains, and employee, and so on. I think it's also useful to say that there is an increase in terms of activity at the board level. And I just wanted to very quickly say engagement. One company that I spoke with recently has said that a couple of years ago, there was probably one call every, maybe at maximum once a week, from an investor. A year ago, it might have been twice a week that there was a call from an investor. Now it's almost daily. And that is, again, it's a heightened recognition of sustainability and what it means. And on the board side of things, I'm seeing an increase in clients in their interest in having somebody around the table appointed to the role that actually brings a fundamental understanding of sustainability to the table. And watch this space, because I think 2021 will have more of that rather than less, and an accelerated pace. Lastly, I think,
Nina, we have just
okay,
2 minutes left.
then I will counter through to say we're at a time of exponential curves and impact and solutions, and if you don't take change by the hand, it'll take you by the throat.
Okay, thank you. I have one question that I want to ask before we close. While COVID has some accelerators for sustainability with digital and technology, what and where are your biggest concerns on how COVID time period can degrade the process?
I think that the reflections that I'm hearing from my clients is that there's more rather than less focus on sustainability than there was pre-COVID. So it's true that if a business is in a feet over fire moment, that things will get waylaid. And I think we need to be, we're human, and businesses need to ensure that there's some survival, right? So I think we would say there's an understandable hiccup in those kinds of companies, but across the board, there is far more emphasis than there ever was. And I think we're going to see actually even more of an upswing in 2021 than we saw in 2020.
Okay. Well, thanks a lot, Nina. And thanks a lot to the audience for
Yes,
this
indeed.
active engagement participation. If you're interested in these type of topics, there's a series of webcasts where we're going to talk about collaborative leadership and compassionate leadership. We're going to talk about the noble purpose. So please follow the webcast through the website of the conference board. We would be very happy if you just take a couple of seconds to fill in an evaluation form for us so that we improve ourselves for the future webcasts if we hear your voice, if we get feedback. And again, thanks a lot, Nina, for this great content. And it's just 1 hour, but I think we could keep on talking for hours.
Well, thank you, and thanks to the audience for their active participation. It was great.
Thank you, Nina.